Alright, so welcome back to another MalaysianMotoring review. Now today we have something a little bit more interesting. Of late we've been getting a lot of comments, a lot of people asking us, if I want a affordable and reliable and dependable 7-seater car for me and my family, why would I bother with the Perodua Aruz when Perodua also makes the Alza? Now, this is an argument that's worth bringing up because the Alza is notably cheaper than the Aruz. The Alza is about 60 grand, whereas the Aruz is about 80 grand. Now, of course, for those of us who've spent a lot of time in these cars, we know what the differences are, but what we want to do today is bring those differences to you so that you can see exactly where the differences lie between these two cars to help you make your decision when you're looking to get a brand new 7-seater for you and your family. Let's go check it out. Alright, so let's go take a look at the Alza first. Now we're going to start here because the Alza is the older car. This is actually been around for about 12 years now, believe it or not, 13 by next year. And there is a little bit of evidence that this car is not the newest kid on the block like that one is. We'll actually start with the key. So this is the key that comes with the Alza, and those who are familiar with the first generation Myvi, current owners or previous owners of the first generation Myvi will know that this is the exact same key and fob combination that you used to get on all Perodua cars. The only difference is this one has a new lock and unlock button like that, as opposed to just having a lock, unlock and alarm button. I don't know if that's an improvement, but that's kind of what happens. So anyway, so talking about the Alza, this car was recently refreshed, so it's got a slightly different face and all that nonsense. We've actually covered the facelift features in our full review, which you can check out. I've linked it kind of up there. But let's go and take a look at the car itself. Now, because this is a traditional MPV, you have the traditional MPV roofline. So it looks like an MPV, nothing particularly interesting there. But it's when you start stepping inside that you see some differences. So if you step into the inside of the Alza, one of the unique things about the Alza is the fact that it has this bench seat. Now, you can't actually put 3 people in here, you can only put 2, but you do at least have this nice sort of space kind of there, which is helpful if you want to put a handbag, I guess, or a backpack in between the 2 seats. Or, of course, you can just put it down and you have an armrest, which is nice. An armrest is always nice. But if you look at the interior, you can tell that this is, again, an older car because the basic architecture in here is very familiar to those who have had the first generation Myvi. I used to have one, so I know exactly what this looks like. You just have a central instrument cluster, which means everyone can see how fast you're going or how slowly you're going, I guess, in an MPV. You also get a touchscreen infotainment system, which is actually shared with the Aruz, which is great. So it's got smartphone mirroring as well. It's not the best system on the planet, but it works. And you also have an updated air conditioning system, which features a central vent that is designed specifically to send cold air all the way back to the 3rd row. Now, let's move on from the front, because that's basically all there is in the front. Now, moving to the back. Okay, so these seats, they're actually split in the middle, which means even though you can sit 3 people across, the guy in the middle might not be the most comfortable person on the planet. Now, these things slide, which means if you don't like the people in the 3rd row, you can do this. And then, sitting in the middle, you have lots of legroom, absolutely lots of legroom, tons of headroom, and life is generally quite comfortable. But, of course, you want to be reasonable to the people in the back. You have to move these seats, so you just slide it sort of here, and I still have decent amount of leg room. I've got plenty of foot room, my feet can slide underneath the front seats, and I'm still generally quite comfortable. But again, the guy in the middle might not be the most happy camper on the planet simply because, you know, it's split down the middle. However, one of the differences with this car versus the Aruz is the fact that it comes with this screen up here. I can understand when this car was new about 12 years ago, having a screen in the car would have been a big deal, but nowadays it just, I don't see why this is here. Children are given smartphones and tablets and all sorts of things. This is just weird. But again, that's an Alza thing. An Alza comes with the screen, not the Aruz. But we have to talk about the 3rd row, obviously. So let's get down there. So there's instructions down the side, which is very useful. So you push this, and then Is that as far as it... See, then it slides forward, and then you have a tiny little space within which you can try and get comfy. Now, I'm going to try and do this gracefully, which is hard. Yeah. Okay. All right, so now that we're in the back, this third row is meant for children, basically, because there's really not a lot of legroom. Actually, I'm pretty good for knee room, if I'm honest. Headroom is fine too, but the problem is the seat base is very close to the floor, so I have no under thigh support. I guess I could stretch out a little bit. I can tuck sort of the ends of my feet underneath the row in front of me, but it's not the most comfortable place on the planet. There are cup holders back here, which is nice. And the windows here do help in terms of alleviating claustrophobia, but it's not great. Also back here you don't get isofix anchors, so if you're looking to put in child seats, you have to put them in the second row. Not back here. Absolutely not back here. Now let's very quickly move to the boot part. Just excuse me for trying to get out of here like a decent human being. Okay, now moving the boot. This is, to me, the biggest difference between the Aruz and the Alza. So the Alza has that much space. I apologize for the mess, but this is basically the best representation you can get. I've got a small bag here, and it just sort of, that's all the room there is, really. I actually had an opportunity to put 6 people in this car with some luggage, and we got maybe 2 bags back here, and everybody else had to put their bags on their lap. Not the most comfortable arrangement on the planet, but there we are. Overall, I think the best way to look at this is as a 5+2. These rear seats should be considered as occasional use only, not all the time, because if you are ferrying 7 passengers all the time, the Alza might not be the best bet for you. But now let's go and take a look at the Aruz. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the Aruz. So first off, we'll start with the key. Now this is Perodua's new generation, am I showing this right? This is Perodua's new generation key, which allows for lots of keyless entry sort of stuff. So you don't actually have to use this. You can just put it in your pocket and just unlock the car really easily. And it feels nice and solid too. It doesn't feel like a cheap item that might break on you. But anyway, so if we look at styling wise, you can tell that the Aruz is definitely a newer car. It's got the new Perodua corporate face that we first saw with the Axia, the Beza, and then the Myvi, and now this. So it's got the slim headlights, the big grille, and all that sort of nonsense. Again, we've actually covered this car. I believe it might have actually been this very car that we reviewed when the Aruz first came out. You can check out that video up here. So let's very quickly move around. So let's step into the interior of the car very quickly. Now, anyway, so stepping into the car, you can see that there are huge differences in here. For starters, this dashboard design is a lot more modern, and because it's the advanced variant, you get these nice little bits of silver and chrome trim dotted around the place, which help make the car look really smart and bright. You have the same central screen here. Well, it runs the same software, but it's a slightly different unit. So on this one, it's actually got this nice sort of matte finish on it, which means it's very easy to use and it doesn't leave any fingerprint marks. On top of that, you also have things like a central lock and unlock button here, which makes it a lot easier if, for example, 2 parents are in the car, one goes out to, I don't know, withdraw money at an ATM or something, and you need to lock all the doors. You can do that from here. You also have a digital aircon meter control panel, which means it's very easy for you to set the air conditioning to what your desired temperature might be. And you also have memory settings, which is very, very, very useful in this climate, because it means you can have one setting for like nighttime when it's a bit cooler, and one for the afternoon when it's blazing bloody hot. Anyway, but moving on very quickly, so this infotainment system still has your smartphone mirroring, which again, not the best thing in the world, but it is workable. You also have on this side your start-stop button. That car still uses a key to start it, which feels really old, honestly. But anyway, we'll move past that very quickly. You have your built-in smart tag down here, which is very, very useful. So far, no hiccups ever since I've had this car. And down here, you actually have a USB port for charging, specifically for charging. You have one on the infotainment screen itself. You also have an HDMI port, which allows you to, again, just mirror your smartphone onto the screen. And you also have a proper sort of 12-volt socket if you want to put in another USB charger or what have you. Now, the steering wheel in this car is leather wrapped. It feels really good to the hand. It looks great. And you have a much more updated instrument cluster with a couple of dials and a more informative central screen, which also comes with an eco indicator, so you know exactly how economically you're driving. But let's move to the second row. Now, again, here you'll start to see some similarities with the Alza a little bit. But there have also been some improvements. So first, in the second row, they're still slidable forwards and backwards. So this is its forwardmost position, and even here, this seat has actually been set up to my video assistant's driving position. He's very tall and I'm not. And I actually have a decent amount of legroom here. And headroom is, of course, not a problem at all. But this bench is now split 60-40, which means that the guy in the middle doesn't have a seam running through his back, which is really, really helpful. Plain. Anyway. You also have things like the teh tarik hook. There's only one in the Alza. This car comes with two. And you also have the anti-snatch theft hook, which is very, very useful. Another big improvement with the Aruz is the fact that this car comes with lots and lots and lots of cup holders, whereas the Alza doesn't appear to have any in the front at all, which is really weird. And on top of that, the Aruz has air conditioning back here. So some people have said that this is just an aircon blower. We actually had a Malaysian motorist point out to us that there is actually a cooling element in here. So it's sort of like an air conditioner a little bit. It's not the coldest thing in the world, but it does feed air conditioning from the front through here with additional cooling before it goes into the back row. So this is very effective, and you can adjust the fan speed, which means that you have quite a lot of available settings back here. So everyone in the back will be comfortable. But I think over the Alza, this car has a much more comfortable seating position because my under thigh is supported a little bit better. I've got a little bit better knee room. It's just a better all-round experience. But now, these seats have been set up to the optimum position to have 7 people in the car, as to, you know, sort of, so that no one hogs the leg room, as it were. So now we are going to check out what life is like in the third row. I'm going to apologize now because my video assistant has a very difficult task of getting that in an elegant sort of fashion, while I get in an inelegant sort of fashion. So bear with me. You pull this thing and then it flips. Okay, so where the Alza would tip and then fold, sort of slide forwards, this actually tips forward, so you have a much better opening here. And on top of that, you also have these scuff plates down here, which means that as you step in, you're not damaging anything. So if I step into the back, yeah, ow. Hello. So once you're in the back, if I just put that up to a reasonable height, actually back here it's not that bad. So again, I have the same sort of knee room that I had in the Alza. I think there's a slight improvement here, and I still have a little bit of space underneath the seats to slide my feet in. There are cup holders back here, but there's also a 12-volt socket here too, which means that if you have children on this row, they can charge their devices up while you're moving along. Now, once again, like in the Alza, only the second row come with ISOFIX mounts, so you can't put child seats back here. But I think that the overall accommodation back here is slightly better than the Alza. But if I had to nitpick, if I absolutely had to nitpick, I think that these windows, because they come down a little bit, it's not quite as, it doesn't quite mitigate claustrophobia as well as the windows in the Alza. But again, I'm really nitpicking here because I know that even though that car has slightly bigger windows, this car has a much better air conditioning system, so I'd be a lot more comfortable back here. So now we're going to move into the boot, which once again requires me to be very inelegant in my exit of this vehicle. Oh, good. There's a bus. That's always fun. Many things we have to do to kind of get our... Can you just see that's really bloody loud? Anyway, come back. So now we're going to look at the boot. So again, biggest difference between the Aruz and the Alza is the fact the Aruz has actual legitimate space. So demonstrated by bag and all sorts of what nonsense. You can actually see there is genuine space back here for things, and there's enough space, I believe, for about 5 people's worth of luggage back here. But of course, these seats can be tumbled, so you just have to push that forward, and then you pull this strap here, and they tumble like that. So when you free up all that space, you have a lot more room back here. But unfortunately, these seats are fixed in place. You can't unscrew them and take them out, so you can't have it as a pure 5-seater, as it were. But it's not bad in terms of the space that you need. And of course, if you want to carry longer items, you can just bring that back down. You can fold the second row flat, and then you can just put stuff kind of all the way in. So this is a pretty usable and dynamic sort of space. You can adapt it to what you need out of it. But that said, the amount of room that's already available back here is very, very impressive for what is ultimately a 7-seater family car. So now we're driving the Alza, which, I mean, again, this car's been around for 12 years, not much has really changed. So it's still very echoey in here, as I'm sure you can hear. But overall, it's just a regular car. There's not much noteworthy about it. So this car runs a 1.5 litre DVVT engine, which produces some amount of power and some amount of torque. I can't remember off the top of my head. But what's noteworthy is that this engine doesn't feel like it's been given the same amount of attention as the 1.5 litre units in the Myvi and indeed in the Perodua Aruz. Because having driven this car a little bit, it feels like it consumes a little bit more fuel than the other 1.5 litre models in the Perodua range. And on top of that, it isn't the most satisfying to drive, as it were. The Aruz and the Myvi both feel a lot perkier with this engine rather than in this particular car. But that said, when I first drove the Aruz, it felt like the Aruz was the heavier vehicle that didn't really quite deliver all the performance that this 1.5 had to offer. I suspect that it might have something to do with this particular car, because this particular unit that we're driving is relatively high mileage for a press car. So there might be some wear and tear bits here and there. But overall, the experience in here is exactly what you'd expect of a car of this price point, in this sort of packaging style and what have you. It's dependable, it's reliable. I know several handymen and workmen who use these cars to run their business every day, and so they put staff, they put all sorts of crap in their Alza, and they use it as a daily workhorse. And that's what Perodua likes to think that this car is. It is a workhorse, be it for work or for family. There is, however, something that I do want to bring up, and that's a matter of durability. Even though the aesthetics in this car aren't the best, it's not the best effort from Perodua, not by a long shot, but there's a certain sense of durability that you get in here, from the fabric on the doors to the material actually used for the door cards. Yes, it's not the most pleasant material on the planet, but you know that this will last, not just through your lifetime, but through the lifetime of your children, who may be a bit more abusive with this thing than you would be. Everything here, almost everything in here, can be wiped down or easily replaced. They don't feel brittle. They feel relatively well manufactured, just not premium standards lah. But that's what you'd expect, right, from a car of this price point. However, in terms of visibility in this car, which is a point that I would really like to stress, forwards visibility is fine. Through the sides is excellent, thanks to these quarter windows that sit just behind the wing mirror. I mean, it reveals, to the naked eye, it would reveal a very small portion of the road, but it makes a big difference, especially at junctions. And at the back, thanks to those relatively large windows, you can see quite a bit out of them. The blind spot has been cleverly mitigated in this car, I feel, and that makes this car very easy to drive around in town, in tight parking spaces. Oh, speaking of parking spaces, this car comes with a reverse camera, which is very, very helpful if you're not used to driving anything this long. But what I'll leave you with is, this is a very adept town car. It's pretty decent on the motorway with noise, vibration, and harshness at relatively manageable levels, even up to highway speeds. but it isn't remarkable. It does well. It's just not fabulous, as it were. But not bad. Oh, also, the air conditioner in the front that's supposed to reach the third row thanks to those vents, it works. I can personally verify that it works. I have no doubt that the Aruz's extra air conditioner vents just in front of the second row will be much more useful than this fixed blower thingy, but it makes a difference, and difference is a difference no matter what, right? Okay, so now we're driving the Aruz, and one of the things that immediately strikes me while driving this car is the fact that this feels like a much newer vehicle. It has nothing to do with the interior design or anything of that sort. It's just about how much more refined the engine is. Now, Perodua bills himself as an evolutionary company, a company that will make small incremental changes wherever possible. And it seems that in the last 12 years, since they launched the Alza, they have made lots of small changes to the powertrain, which is largely lifted from that car into this one. And it just presents itself a lot better. This engine feels a lot more willing. It also feels a lot smoother and a lot quieter. The engine feels like it's so far away because you hear very little of it. On top of that, when you're driving around, you feel no vibration through the steering wheel or the pedals. It's just a nice... That wasn't for me, was it? It's just a nice little place to be, if I'm honest. It also helps the fact that this car is very tall, because it means that you can very easily see out and sort of down toward other people. And it gives you a commanding driving position when you're driving around. And of course, the extra ground clearance. The extra ground clearance helps whenever it inevitably floods, as it likes to, especially in KL lately. And the thing I like about the Aruz, most of all, is the fact that it feels like a big Myvi. And I mean that in the best possible sense, because the Myvi is by far and away one of the best cars that Perodua has ever produced. And the Aruz, even though this is the first 7-seater SUV they've ever made, it feels like they've taken all the learnings from the Myvi and applied them here. And as a result, you get a cabin and a car that's very thoughtful, it's very considered, from things like the size of the door mirrors to the fact that there is a vent on the dashboard to help feed air into that this blower thingy back here, to the fact that you still have the same digital air conditioning controls as you got in the Myvi. The snatch theft hook too. It's just things that feel very well considered. And it also seems that they've righted some wrongs that may have existed with the Aruz, like, with the Alza. Things like the lack of cup holders, they've definitely fixed that in here. There's 3 cup holders just in the middle of the car, let alone the 4. I mean, there's 2 on each door, there's more back there, there's even more in the third row. Like, everyone can have 2 bottles of water each, no problem. And on top of that, they've also helped improve things like the perceived quality in here. So even though the materials themselves feel just as sort of scratchy and harsh as they did in the Alza, here it's just presented in a manner that makes you think less about the quality behind it. But, and this is a big but, the sense of durability that I was talking about in the Alza is still very much apparent here. You can tell that these panels are made to last a long time. Perodua will not like me very much for having punched their car, but I can tell you that this will take my abuse and the abuse of children, many children, for many years, because that's kind of the tolerances that Perodua tests its cars to. They expect these cars to be able to last for as long, if not longer, than would be considered reasonable for a car of this kind. Now, I'd like to touch on another matter now that we're in the Aruz, and that is fuel economy. So in the, you might have, I'm actually braking downhill, and when you brake downhill in an Aruz, it drops a gear to help with a little bit of engine braking. It's very useful. Anyway, so going back to fuel economy, the Alza seems to consume quite a bit of fuel, if I'm honest. I am not entirely sure why that is, given that the Alza should technically have better aerodynamics than this car, and it is lighter than this car, given that it's a monocoque construction and not a body-on-frame construction like this car. And it also feeds the front wheels rather than the rear wheels in this, so you're not losing anything to the prop shaft and the diff. Is it diff? Anyway, so because you're not losing any of the power in between, it means that technically the Alza should be the more efficient car. But driving this thing around, over the last few days, we've been getting an average of about 13 to 14 kilometers per litre, which is very, very good in a big 7-seater like this. Honest to goodness, it is a very impressive figure. But in the Alza, it feels more like 9 kilometers to 10 kilometers per litre, which is not so great. Again, I'm not sure why that is, but the Aruz is definitely the more fuel efficient vehicle of the two. So if that is a big factor for you, then this is definitely the car you ought to consider. Oh, wait, hang on a second. My video assistant has very kindly reminded me that there is one other subject that I absolutely have to touch on before we go, and that is safety. So when the Alza came out, it was very much par for the course. I mean, it's got a very strong passenger cell. It has a decent number of airbags, ISOFIX mounts, all that sort of nonsense. But since the arrival of the Alza, Perodua has made huge improvements in terms of active and passive safety. So now the passenger cells are safer, more rigid, stiffer, and are better suited to deal with, or rather withstand, the impact that come with an accident. And also, in terms of active safety, the Aruz is much better equipped than the Alza. So the Aruz comes with ASA, or Active Safety Assist 2.0. So that means you have a couple of cameras fixed onto the windscreen which look ahead of you, and they will help with things like autonomous emergency braking, pedal misoperation control, front vehicle departure alert, as well as pre-collision warning. All of these things work together at speeds under 80 kilometers an hour to help prevent, mitigate, or minimize the effects of an accident. It is very, very useful, and this sort of thing has been proven to be very effective in not just our market but other markets as well. Some companies go as far as to claim that City Speed AEB helps reduce urban accidents, be it with pedestrians or vehicles, by as much as 80%. So this is very, very useful, particularly if you find yourself stuck in traffic jams a lot, or if you drive in town a lot. This sort of thing will be very useful. But because it is also effective up to speeds of 80 kilometers an hour, it means that it is also quite effective on the motorway, provided that you're not speeding. So, if you had to buy a Perodua 7-seater, is the Aruz worth it, or is the Alza all you need? Well, if all you want is 7 seats, or specifically 5 plus 2 seats for you to use occasionally, and you prefer a lower driving position, and you can live with the fact that it lacks some of the modern conveniences that we've gotten very used to, the Alza is actually a very, very good proposition. Even though it's coming up to about 13 years old now, it is still easily the best MPV that money can buy in that segment. It's very efficient, it is incredibly reliable, and it will do duty as absolutely anything, be it a workhorse, be it a family car, whatever you need out of it, it will do. But, and this is a big but, if you want something a bit bigger, if you want something a little bit more practical, a little bit more, how do you say, versatile, if you want something that elevates your capabilities and is able to elevate your lifestyle, and insert more Perodua slogans here, then the Aruz is a much better car. It is safer, it's more refined, it is just as reliable, and it's a bit more stylish, it's a bit more trendy. This is what everybody wants now, an SUV. And objectively speaking, the Aruz is actually a really good SUV. Forget the fact that we're comparing it against the Alza, it's just a really good car. And with that in mind, if you had to buy a 7-seater from Perodua because you love the brand and you know how reliable it is, then the Aruz should be the only car you should consider. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and if you liked my presentation, you can follow me on Twitter or on Instagram at Ayman I Abdullah. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next video, hopefully before it rains. Bye!